history, we love to look at things on the biggest possible orders of magnitude. For example, we ask ourselves, who's the biggest killer of all time? And we continue to compare the atrocities of Mao and Stalin and Hitler with a mix of awe and terror at the tens of millions of lives lost and the utter changing of history by singular people. But in doing this, we tend to gloss over some incredibly complex regimes and atrocities that were more isolated, that had less to do with the course of capital H history narratives like the Cold War and World War II. The Cambodian Genocide of the 1970s was one of these stories. In the backdrop of the Vietnam War, it was a rather hidden 4-year affair from 1975 to 1979, where 2 out of 7 million Cambodians died under a mysterious communist regime known as the Khmer Rouge. The story, as with many in the 20th century, starts with imperialism. French Indochina was a colony established by, you guessed it, France in 1887, consisting of the present-day countries Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Fast forward to 1954, and all 3 nations gained independence after a brutal war is fought, largely in the theater of Vietnam, where the anti-imperial group, the Viet Minh, fought against the French, and finally was able to rule North Vietnam as a communist state. This is the end of the First Indochina War. A year later, the 1955 Second Indochina War begins. The US joins, and things get chaotic as the Northern Viet Minh, now the North Vietnam Army, support the Viet Cong, a South Vietnamese communist group, to overthrow the anti-communist South Vietnam leader. It's complicated, but what's important to know is that the North Vietnam is supporting Viet Cong soldiers by going through Laos and Cambodia, which America was not officially at war with and then could not attack, except they did, with bombs. Let's get back to Cambodia. At this point in the late 1960s, Norodom Sihanouk is the royal leader of Cambodia. He wants peace, but as Cambodian land becomes further entrenched in the war, what with Nixon's war expansion doctrine and the secret bombings of Cambodia, he is unable to make that happen. In 1970, when Sihanouk is away in China, there is a military overthrow led by a man named Lon Nol. At the same time, a communist guerrilla group is developing in the forests of Cambodia, drawing more attention as the American bombings make the situation more and more dire. This group is called the Khmer Rouge. Khmer meaning the majority ethnicity group in Cambodia, and Rouge, French for red, indicating the communist roots of the party. This group's leaders, interestingly enough, were almost all Cambodian students and teachers who studied in Europe and were inspired by the idealism of the French and Russian revolutions. The most famous among these party leaders was the quiet man named Pol Pot. As the Khmer Rouge gains traction, Sihanouk decides that his only way of getting power back is to align with them. So he does. He becomes their figurehead, and with that he gives the Khmer Rouge even more recognition and respect among the peasants. He decries the way Lon Nol's government is wasting foreign aid, that all they live for is the US dollar. No matter how much speaking he does, however, it is clear from a historical perspective that Sihanouk is largely used and ultimately is not able to hold much power within the Khmer Rouge. In 1975, the Khmer Rouge invade the capital city of Cambodia, Phnom Penh, and finally take power. From there, they work to put their ideal vision together, a peasant-oriented nation based entirely in agriculture and rejecting all of free market capitalism. The Khmer Rouge worked towards a super great leap forward, or 4-year plan, based on the corresponding Chinese Maoist plans, to boost agriculture. Interestingly enough, they did not attribute their ideologies to outside leaders at all. The first course of action in this super great leap forward was emptying the cities, forcefully, completely. Thousands of old and young and sick died as they were pushed to an uncertain fate in the countryside. From there was 100% communalization and collectivization. They took Chinese ideals, which were seen as distant futures for Mao, and put them to complete and dangerous fruition. Family was a construct of the past. The state was father and mother. The government owned all. They banned all religion. Cham Muslims and native Christians were hunted as party enemies. All youth were either in the farm or on the military, both of which were rather unsuccessful. These youth were also incredibly indoctrinated. However, there was no leader worship or deification. Pol Pot, the ultimate dictator and orchestrator, was an unknown face to many. The Khmer Rouge stayed mysterious, all power, omnipresent. This is perhaps best seen in the interrogation facilities, the most important of which was dubbed S-21. Only 7 of the thousands taken to this facility made it out alive. There are stories of unspeakable and brutal terror, mostly on innocent people killed merely for the sake of the state proving their point. The death toll in Cambodia, as I said, was 2 out of 7 million, which is probably an unmatched ratio in history. And the most interesting and unsettling part of it all was that these deaths were largely those of native Cambodians. Some say the Khmer Rouge engendered what could be called an auto-genocide, a suicidal attempt at statehood. The regime was defeated in 1979 by Vietnamese forces. However, Cambodia has not recovered for the most part. It continues to stay stagnant, industrially, for better or worse. Corruption runs strong, but worst of all, the mass fear of the government has continued, well past the generation that lived in the midst of the Khmer Rouge terror. These abuses and their ideological justifications by the Khmer Rouge remain confusing. When Pol Pot was tried in the 90s, he clung to his ideals, claiming, "I came to carry out the struggle, not to kill people. Even now you can look at me. Am I a savage person? My conscience is clear. I do not reject responsibility. Our movement made mistakes like every other movement in the world. But there was another aspect that was outside of our control, the enemy activities against us." This back and forth between inner and outer influences on the Khmer Rouge remains a leading question about this topic. How much of this was inevitable, based on native thought, and how much was engendered by unreachable ideals and government intervention from Vietnam and the USA? In the study of world history, it is crucial to question this in many situations. A whole context is needed for the best possible interpretation. Thank you.